My parents refused to care for my 4-year-old twins while I was in emergency surgery because they had VIP tickets to see Taylor Swift with my golden child sister. They told me I was a nuisance and a burden while I was lying on the bathroom floor, thinking I was about to die. So I called a stranger from a nanny agency to save my children, cut all family ties, and ended the $15,000 a month of financial support I gave them. 4 weeks later, they showed up at my door expecting their allowance, and the look on their faces when I handed them an eviction notice instead was absolutely priceless. Before I tell you how I destroyed their entitled little world, please like and subscribe if you have ever been the family bank account instead of a beloved daughter. My name is Nia, and at 32 years old, running a multi-million-dollar fintech company is easier than getting my mother to care about my life. The digital clock on the marble vanity read 2:14 in the morning, but all I could focus on was the sensation of a serrated knife twisting inside my lower abdomen. I was curled up on the cold bathroom tile, sweat matting my hair to my forehead. In the hallway, my 4-year-old twins, Leo and Maya, were screaming. They had woken up when I collapsed and knocked over a glass vase. Their terrified cries were piercing my eardrums, making the nausea worse, but I could not stand up to comfort them. I knew this pain. My doctor had warned me 2 days ago that my appendix was a ticking time bomb, but I had pushed through meetings because I had no one to watch the kids. Now the bomb had detonated. With trembling fingers, I reached for my phone. The screen was blurry through my tears. I tapped the favorites list. Mom, please pick up. Please just this once be a mother. The phone rang 4 times. Each ring felt like an eternity. Finally, the line connected. I expected a sleepy, worried voice. Instead, I heard thumping bass and laughter in the background. Nia, it is 2 in the morning, my mother. Wanda snapped, her voice sharp and annoyed. Why are you calling me Mom? I gasped, clutching my side as another wave of agony washed over me. I need help. My appendix. I think it is rupturing. The twins are crying. I need to get to the ER. Please, I need you to come over. I waited for the panic. I waited for her to say she was on her way. I lived in the penthouse just 20 minutes from their rented villa. A villa I paid for. Instead, I heard her sigh loudly, the sound of someone being incredibly inconvenienced. Nia, are you serious right now? We are in the middle of trying on outfits. We leave for the Eras Tour concert in 3 hours. Jasmine is finally happy and we are all vibing. Do not bring your negative energy into this house. I could not believe what I was hearing. I was telling her I might be dying, and she was talking about concert vibes. Mom, I am scared. I choked out, the room spinning. I cannot move. The kids are alone. Oh, stop being so dramatic, she scoffed. You always do this when Jasmine gets something nice. It is just a stomach ache. Take a Tylenol and go to sleep. We have VIP tickets, Nia. $5,000 a seat. I am not missing Taylor Swift because you ate something bad. Figure it out yourself. But Mom, the kids, I pleaded, my voice barely a whisper. The line went dead. She hung up. She actually hung up. I stared at the phone in disbelief as the silence of the rejection drowned out even the screams of my children. My own mother left me to potentially die on a bathroom floor because she did not want to ruin my sister's concert experience. That was the moment the daughter in me died, and the CEO in me woke up. I wiped the tears from my eyes, dialed 911 with shaking hands, and prepared to go to war. I stared at the black screen of my phone, the silence in the bathroom deafening against the rhythmic thumping of my own heart. The pain in my side had shifted from a dull ache to a sharp tearing sensation that stole the breath from my lungs. My intuition, honed by years of navigating high-stakes boardrooms, told me this was not just a stomach ache. Something inside me was failing. I managed to drag myself into a sitting position, my back against the cold porcelain of the bathtub, and dialed the one number I prayed would be different. My father, Desmond. He was a deacon at our church, a man who stood at the pulpit every Sunday preaching about the sanctity of family and the obligation to protect our own. Surely the man who taught me to ride a bike would not leave me to die. I pressed the call button. my hands shaking so violently I almost dropped the device. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, the call connected, but before I could even whimper, I was met with a wall of noise. Screams of excitement, upbeat pop music, and the distinct chaotic energy of a stadium crowd. Nia, why are you harassing your mother? My father's voice boomed deep and laced with irritation. She is trying to take a picture of Jasmine in front of the stage. You are blowing up her notifications. Stop it. Dad, please listen to me. I gasped, tears streaming freely now, mixing with the sweat on my face. It is not a stomachache. The doctor on the telehealth line said my symptoms match a ruptured appendix. It is critical. I am terrified, Dad. I need you to come get the twins. I cannot drive. I waited for the shift in his tone. I waited for the fatherly concern to kick in. Instead, I heard him cover the microphone, slightly muttering something about me being hysterical to someone nearby. When he came back on the line, his voice was cold, stripped of any empathy. You are always so dramatic, Nia. Do you have any idea where we are? We are in the VIP section of the Eras tour. Do you know how hard it was to get these seats? I squeezed my eyes shut, the pain radiating down my leg. Dad, I am talking about surgery. I am talking about my life. And I am talking about an investment, he snapped. His patience gone. These tickets were $5,000 a person, Nia. $5,000. We spent $20,000 to give your sister this night. This is a once-in-a-lifetime experience for Jasmine. She has been talking about this for months. And you want us to leave. You want us to throw away $20,000 and walk out right before the opening act because you are in pain. The number hung in the air like a guillotine blade. $5,000. That was the price tag on my life. My father, the man whose mortgage I paid every month, was weighing my potential death against a 3-hour concert, and I was losing. You are being incredibly selfish, Nia. He continued, his voice dripping with disappointment. You have always been jealous of Jasmine's happiness. Let your sister have her moment. Call an Uber if it is that bad. Do not call us again until the show is over. The line clicked dead. The silence that followed was heavier than the first. I stared at the phone, the screen illuminating my tear-stained face. My father had not just chosen a concert over me. He had put a dollar value on my existence, and apparently I was worth less than a VIP seat at a Taylor Swift show. The realization hit me harder than the physical pain. I was truly, completely alone. I looked at the time. My vision was starting to tunnel. I knew if I did not act now, Leo and Maya would be orphans by morning. I had to stop being a daughter and start being a survivor. I dragged my body off the cold tiles and managed to unlock the front door for the paramedics, but before I let myself lose consciousness, I had one final transaction to make. I did not call a friend or a distant relative. I dialed the number for Platinum Care, an elite agency that provided emergency childcare for the 1%. My voice was raspy as I gave the operator my credit card number. $200 an hour. That was the emergency rate, plus a $500 after-hours surcharge. I was buying safety for my children because the people who shared my DNA were too busy dancing to shake it off. By the time the ambulance arrived, the deal was done. The scene in the emergency room waiting area was a tableau of my personal failure. I sat in a wheelchair, doubled over in a hospital gown, while Leo and Maya huddled against my legs, their eyes wide with terror. The triage nurse looked at me with a mixture of concern and confusion. She asked if my husband was coming. I said he was gone. She asked if my parents were coming. I lied and said they were out of the country because saying they were 20 miles away at a stadium felt too pathetic to admit out loud. Then the automatic doors slid open and a stranger walked in. Her name was Hattie. She was a heavy-set woman in her 60s with kind eyes and a sensible cardigan, the kind of grandmother figure I desperately wished my own mother was. But she was not family. She was an employee. I watched as this complete stranger knelt down to my children's level and offered them juice boxes she had brought in her purse. My heart shattered into a million pieces. I was handing over my most precious treasures to a woman I had met 10 seconds ago. I had to sign a liability waiver with a shaking hand, authorizing her to make medical decisions for them if I died on the table. The humiliation burned hotter than the fever in my body. "Mommy, do not go," Leo whimpered, clinging to the arm of the wheelchair. I held his face in my hands, forcing a smile I did not feel. "Mommy has to get her tummy fixed, baby. Miss Hattie is going to take you to get ice cream and watch cartoons. I love you. Be brave for me." As the orderlies wheeled me away, I looked back one last time. I saw Hattie holding my children's hands, leading them toward the exit. I was paying for my parents' 4-bedroom villa. I paid the lease on my father's luxury sedan. I covered their health insurance, their vacations, and their country club fees. Yet here I was, paying a stranger $200 an hour to hold my children's hands because my family was too busy celebrating life to care if I lost mine. The anesthesia mask came down over my face, and my last thought before the darkness took me was a promise. If I woke up from this, the Bank of Naya was closing forever. The fluorescent lights of the hospital corridor flickered overhead like strobe lights in slow motion as the orderlies wheeled me toward the operating room. Each rhythmic clack of the gurney wheels against the linoleum floor echoed the pounding in my ears. Lying there stripped of my designer clothes and dressed in a thin paper blue gown, I felt a kind of cold that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It was the chill of absolute abandonment. I looked to my left, instinctively searching for a hand to hold, but there was only the metal rail of the bed. My mind drifted back 2 years ago to a different hospital room, but the smell of antiseptic was exactly the same. My father Desmond had been lying in a bed at St. Luke's, clutching his chest. He needed a triple bypass surgery. His insurance had denied the claim for the specific specialist he wanted, the best cardiac surgeon in the state. I remembered standing at the foot of his bed, watching my mother wring her hands and cry about how they would lose him. I did not hesitate, not for a second. I pulled out my checkbook and wrote a check for $50,000 to cover the surgery and the private recovery suite. I remembered the look on his face when I handed him the receipt. He had called me his angel. He had told everyone in the waiting room that I was the blessing of the family, the rock they could always lean on. My mother had hugged me so tight I could barely breathe, whispering that they did not know what they would do without me. I paid for his heart to keep beating. I paid for his second chance at life. I asked for nothing in return, not even a repayment plan. The irony was so sharp, it felt like it was cutting through my skin. I had bought my father a new heart, yet tonight he did not have the heart to leave a concert to make sure I survived. The $50,000 check I wrote for him was real. The love they claimed to have for me was counterfeit. As the double doors of the operating theater swung open, I was hit with a blast of freezing air and the blinding brightness of surgical lamps. The anesthesiologist leaned over me, his mask hiding his face, and told me to count backward from 10. 10. I thought about the text message I sent Dad that was left on read. 9. I thought about Jasmine posting selfies while I bled. 8. I thought about that $50,000 and how many other things I had paid for since then. 7. A single tear escaped from the corner of my eye and slid into my hair. It would be the last tear I ever shed for them. By the time I reached 5, the darkness swallowed me whole, and for the first time that night, I welcomed the silence. Waking up from anesthesia is a disorienting, lonely experience. The first thing I noticed was the silence. It was not the peaceful silence of a morning at home, but the sterile, mechanical silence of a recovery room, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of the cardiac monitor. My mouth felt like it was filled with cotton, and a dull, throbbing ache pulsed in my side, a reminder that they had indeed cut me open. I blinked against the harsh fluorescent lights, turning my head slowly to the side. The chair next to my bed was empty. No flowers, no card, no mother holding my hand. Just the cold, white laminate of the bedside table. I reached for my phone with a heavy, clumsy hand. It was 5 in the morning. Maybe, just maybe, they had come to the hospital after the concert. Maybe they were in the waiting room. Maybe there were missed calls. I unlocked the screen. No texts, no voicemails. But there was a notification from Instagram. Jasmine had tagged me in a photo. My thumb hovered over the icon. Part of me, the foolish, hopeful child inside, wanted to believe it was a prayer request or a get-well-soon post. I tapped the screen. The image that loaded burned itself into my retinas. It was a high-angle selfie taken in the VIP section of the stadium. The background was a blur of purple lights and thousands of people. In the foreground, my family was beaming. My mother looked younger than she had in years, wearing a sparkly sequined jacket I had bought her for Christmas. My father was holding a $20 beer, laughing with his head thrown back. Jasmine was in the center, glowing with excitement, wearing a custom Eras Tour outfit that cost more than my first car. And there was Kyle, my brother-in-law, grinning like he had just won the lottery, his arm draped possessively over Jasmine. They looked perfect. They looked happy. They looked like a family who did not have a care in the world. But it was the caption that stopped my heart cold. Family is everything. So blessed to share this night with my favorite people. Love my parents and my amazing hubby. Best night ever. #Eras Tour. I stared at the words. Family is everything. Except apparently the member of the family who was being sliced open by a surgeon at the exact moment this photo was taken. They had not just ignored my crisis, they had erased it. They were celebrating while I was fighting for my life. I waited for the tears to come. I waited for the crushing weight of sadness that usually followed their rejection. But as I looked at Kyle's toothy grin and my father's carefree laugh, I realized something profound. I was not sad. I was not even angry anymore. I was done. The sensation was immediate and absolute, like a circuit breaker tripping in my soul. The daughter who craved their approval died on that operating table. The woman lying in this bed was someone new. Someone cold. Someone who realized that if family is everything, then I no longer had a family. I took a screenshot of the post. It would be the first piece of evidence in the folder I was about to name the end. I lay there for a long time after the nurse left, staring at the ceiling tiles. The pain medication was starting to dull the physical agony, but my mind was sharper than it had ever been. A nurse poked her head in, holding a clipboard. She looked around the empty room, her eyes landing on the vacant chair beside my bed, where a mother or a father should have been sitting. "Is anyone coming for you, honey?" she asked softly. "We need a contact for discharge instructions." I looked her dead in the eye. The old Nia, the people-pleaser who paid for vacations she was not invited to, would have made an excuse. She would have said they were busy or stuck in traffic. But that Nia had died on the operating table. "I do not have any family," I said, my voice steady and cold as ice. "Just put me down as self-discharge." The nurse hesitated, clearly confused, but she nodded and backed out of the room. As soon as the door clicked shut, I reached for my phone again. This time, I did not call my parents. I did not call my sister. I dialed a number that I usually only reserved for business mergers and hostile takeovers. "Mr. Henderson," I said when my lawyer answered on the first ring. "Nia, is everything all right?" "It is 5:30 in the morning," he replied, his voice thick with sleep. "I need you to draft some papers for me," I said, ignoring his question. "I need to dissolve the Brooks Family Trust. I need to revoke all power of attorney privileges granted to Desmond and Wanda Brooks. And I need to start the eviction process for the property at 124 Oak Street." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "Nia, are you sure?" Henderson asked cautiously. "That is the nuclear option. If we do this, there is no going back. You are effectively cutting them off completely." I looked at the screenshot of my family smiling at the concert while I bled out alone. I looked at the empty space where their love should have been. "I am not just cutting them off, Mr. Henderson," I whispered, a dark satisfaction settling in my chest. "I am repossessing my life. Draft the papers. I want them ready for signature by the time I leave this hospital." I hung up the phone and let it drop onto the sheets. The tears were gone. The fear was gone. In their place was something far more dangerous. Clarity. They had spent years treating me like an ATM machine with a heartbeat. They thought their supply of cash and forgiveness was infinite. They were about to learn that even the most generous bank eventually closes its doors. And when mine closed, it was going to lock them out forever. 2 days later, the elevator doors slid open directly into my penthouse foyer. The silence that greeted me was different this time. It was not the lonely silence of the hospital. It was the quiet hum of a well-ordered home, but it felt vast, almost swallowing me whole. I leaned heavily on the walker the hospital had issued me every step, sending a jolt of fire through my stitched abdomen. Ms. Hattie was there before I could even close the door. She did not rush me. She simply moved to my side, offering a sturdy arm for support without being asked. She had set up a recovery station in the living room. There were fluffy pillows arranged on the sofa, a heating pad plugged in and ready, and a thermos of homemade bone broth on the coffee table. "Careful now, honey." Hattie murmured, her voice a soothing balm compared to the harsh neon lights of the ER. "I made sure the kids are down for their nap so you can get settled. You look like you went 12 rounds with a prize fighter." I sank into the cushions, letting out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 48 hours. Hattie bustled around adjusting the blinds to keep the glare out, tucking a blanket around my feet. She was a stranger. I was paying $25 an hour, yet she was treating me with a tenderness my own mother had not shown me since I was a toddler. The contrast was nauseating. My mother knew I was being discharged today. I had sent a text to the family group chat just to see if anyone would respond. The message was marked read by everyone. Desmond, Wanda, Jasmine. Not a single reply. No one offered to pick me up. No one asked if I needed groceries. They were probably sleeping off their post-concert hangovers or brunching at the country club I paid for. "You have got a fever," Hattie observed, placing a cool hand on my forehead. "Not the infection kind, the stress kind. You need to let it go, whatever it is." I looked at this woman whose last name I barely remembered and felt a lump form in my throat. She was doing the job of a mother because she was on the payroll. My actual mother was absent because she was not on the payroll yet this month. "Thank you, Hattie," I whispered. "For everything." She just patted my hand and went to the kitchen to fetch me some water. As I watched her go, the guilt I had been feeling about my decision to cut them off evaporated completely. If love was a transaction to my family, then I was closing the account. They did not deserve my grief. They did not deserve my anger, and they certainly did not deserve the check that was scheduled to deposit into their accounts in 3 days. I reached for my laptop, wincing as I pulled it onto my lap. It was time to balance the books. The era of Nia the provider was over. The era of Nia the debt collector had begun. I balanced my laptop on my knees, wincing slightly as the weight pressed against my incision. I opened the spreadsheet, simply titled Family Expenses. It was a document I updated dutifully on the first of every month. But today, looking at the rows and columns, it looked less like a budget and more like a crime scene. I adjusted my glasses and began the forensic audit of my own stupidity. Line 1. $4,500 for the monthly rent on the Mediterranean-style villa my parents occupied in the suburbs. They insisted they needed 5 bedrooms for when family visited, even though I was the only family who ever visited, and I usually slept on the couch. I stared at that number. $4,500. That was nearly the cost of the VIP tickets my father had valued over my life. He was living like a king in a castle funded by the daughter he called a burden. Line 2. $1,200 for the lease on Jasmine's white Range Rover. She claimed she needed a luxury vehicle to maintain her brand as an up-and-coming lifestyle influencer. I was paying for the gas, the insurance, and the car note so she could drive to brunch and take pictures of avocado toast. She had driven that very car to the stadium, blasting music and laughing, while I was being loaded into an ambulance. Line 3. $3,000 labeled as business investment for Kyle. My brother-in-law called himself an entrepreneur, but his only real talent was spending my money on limited edition sneakers and crypto scams. I had been funding his imaginary venture capital firm for 2 years, hoping it would give him some dignity. Instead, it just gave him the freedom to mock me to my face while cashing my checks behind my back. I scrolled down to the bottom line. Utilities, country club dues, health insurance premiums. The grand total glared back at me in bold red font. $15,250. Every single month. That was over $180,000 a year. I sat back against the pillows, letting the magnitude of that number sink in. I was not a daughter to them. I was a human ATM. I was a payroll department. And I had just been fired from the position of family scapegoat. I moved the cursor to the top of the column, highlighted every single cell, and prepared to hit delete. With a deep breath that rattled in my healing chest, I pressed down on the trackpad. Click. The screen buffered for a second, a spinning wheel of doom for my family's lifestyle, before flashing a green confirmation message. Transfer canceled. That was the rent. I moved to the next line. Jasmine's Range Rover. Click. Canceled. Kyle's investment fund. Click. Canceled. In less than 60 seconds, I had freed up $15,000 of monthly cash flow. It was faster than ordering a pizza, yet it effectively dismantled their entire world. But I was not done. The digital transfers were easy. The next step required a human voice. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Prestige Estate Management, the agency that handled the lease for the villa. It rang twice before their senior agent, Mr. Reynolds, picked up. "Nia, good afternoon," he said warmly. "I assume you are calling about the renewal. The lease on the Oak Street property expires in 30 days. Your father mentioned they wanted to upgrade the pool heating system for the new term." I almost laughed. Of course they did. They were planning upgrades while I was planning their eviction. "Actually, Mr. Reynolds, I am calling to give formal notice," I said, my voice cutting through the pleasantries like a scalpel. "I will not be renewing the lease for 124 Oak Street. Please prepare the vacate notice and send it via certified mail to the occupants today." There was a stunned silence on the other end. "But Nia, your parents have lived there for 5 years. Where will they go?" "That is not my concern," I replied. "My concern is that my name is removed from all liability as of the 1st of the month. Send the notice, Mr. Reynolds, and please make sure it requires a signature upon delivery. I want proof they received it." I hung up the phone and looked out at the city skyline. I had just rendered my parents homeless and stranded my sister without a vehicle in the span of 10 minutes. A week ago, the guilt would have eaten me alive. Today, all I felt was a strange, vibrating energy. It was the feeling of a prisoner who had just found the key to her own cell. They had 30 days to figure out how to survive in the real world. The countdown had officially begun. For 28 days, my phone remained as silent as a tomb. You would think that after a major surgery, a mother's instinct would kick in, or a father would feel a pang of guilt. You would be wrong. The only updates I received about my family came through the glowing screen of social media, where they documented their extended victory lap across the country. They turned the concert trip into a month-long road trip, staying in 5-star hotels and eating at Michelin-star restaurants, all charged to credit cards that they assumed were still being paid by autodraft from my business account. I watched their lives unfold like a reality show I was no longer producing. I saw my mother posing with a designer bag in Nashville. I saw my father holding a glass of scotch in a jazz club in Memphis. I saw Jasmine and Kyle dancing on a boat in New Orleans. They looked vibrant, healthy, and completely unbothered by the fact that the person who funded their joy was learning how to walk again. My recovery was slow and grueling. Every step I took around my penthouse felt like climbing a mountain. The physical scars were healing, knitting together into a jagged pink line across my abdomen, but the emotional clarity was hardening into something impenetrable. In those quiet weeks, Ms. Hattie became more of a family to me than the people I shared DNA with. She taught me how to change my dressings. She cooked nutritious meals. She played board games with the twins so I could rest. She never asked for anything extra, yet she gave me everything I needed. The silence from my family was not just negligence, it was arrogance. They were so confident in their control over me that they did not feel the need to check in. To them, I was not a person. I was an appliance. You do not call your refrigerator to ask how it is feeling. You just expect it to keep the lights on and the food cold. They assumed the bills were being paid because the bills were always paid. They assumed the rent was covered because the rent was always covered. They were living in a bubble of delusion fueled by my money and their own narcissism. I did not reach out to warn them. I did not send a text saying the credit cards were frozen. I did not remind them that the lease was up. I simply waited. I watched the calendar on my wall marking off the days with a red pen. Day 29, day 30. The first of the month was approaching, the day the rent check usually cleared, the day the credit card bills were due. They were driving back home high on life, expecting to walk into their villa and resume their comfortable existence. They had no idea that while they were busy posting hashtags, I had been busy changing the locks on their entire reality. The silence was about to end, and the noise that followed was going to be deafening. While I was learning to navigate the hallway of my penthouse with a cane fighting through the stiffness in my healing muscles, my sister Jasmine was navigating the aisles of the Gucci flagship store in downtown Chicago. I did not need a crystal ball to see the scene. I knew her patterns. She would have walked in with her sunglasses on indoors, snapping her fingers at the sales associates demanding to see the new collection before it hit the shelves. This was the grand finale of their victory lap, a final shopping spree to commemorate a month of selfish indulgence. She had selected a limited edition Dionysus shoulder bag, the kind that cost more than most people's down payment on a car. I could imagine her standing at the counter posing for a selfie with the bag, already drafting the caption about how hard she worked to treat herself. She would have tossed the platinum card I gave her onto the glass counter with the casual arrogance of someone who has never paid a bill in her life. That card was her magic wand. For years she waved it and problems disappeared. She waved it and luxury appeared. But today the magic had run out. The sales associate, a young woman who had likely tolerated Jasmine's condescension for the better part of an hour, inserted the chip into the reader. A sharp, dissonant beep cut through the ambient lounge music. Declined. Jasmine would have laughed first, a high-pitched, incredulous sound. "Excuse me," she would have said loud enough for the other shoppers to hear. "Run it again. Your machine is obviously broken. That card has no limit. Do you know who my sister is?" The associate, maintaining her professional composure, ran it again. The result was the same. Declined. Code 05, do not honor. By now a line had formed behind Jasmine. The impatient tapping of heels and whispered judgments from other customers would have started to prick at her ego. The illusion of the rich, successful influencer was cracking under the weight of a rejected transaction. Jasmine, red-faced and furious, would have snatched the card back, accusing the store of having faulty equipment, accusing the bank of incompetence, accusing the universe of conspiring against her sparkle. That was when the phone in my lap began to vibrate. The screen lit up with Jasmine's contact photo, a heavily filtered selfie of her blowing a kiss. She was not calling to ask if my stitches had dissolved. She was not calling to ask if the twins were sleeping through the night. She was calling because her plastic lifeline had just been severed and she needed the technical support department to fix it immediately. I stared at the vibrating phone, sipping my herbal tea. I could practically hear her voice screaming through the pixels, demanding I fix the glitch, demanding I apologize to the store manager for her embarrassment. I let it ring. Once, twice, 5 times. Then I watched it go to voicemail. For the first time in 26 years, Jasmine was going to have to leave the store empty-handed. The Bank of Nia was closed, and no amount of tantrums would reopen the vault. The chamomile tea in my cup was still steaming, sending tendrils of warmth into the cool air of the penthouse living room. It was the first time in a month I had sat down without a spreadsheet, a lawyer, or a painful grimace. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the silence. But on the marble coaster beside me, my phone was having a seizure. It vibrated against the stone with a manic persistence, dancing closer to the edge with every buzz. I did not need to pick it up to know who it was. Jasmine had likely called Kyle in a panic, screaming that her card was broken, and now my brother-in-law was stepping in to handle the situation, like the man of the house he pretended to be. I watched the screen light up. A text message preview appeared. Nia. Hey. Slight issue. Amex got declined at the pump. We are literally on fumes outside Gary, Indiana. Call the bank ASAP. It is embarrassing. I stared at the words, marveling at the sheer density of the narcissism packed into 3 sentences. There was no greeting. There was no inquiry about my health. There was no acknowledgement that they had been ghosts for 4 weeks while I recovered from major surgery. There was only a demand. They were stranded and they expected me to parachute in digitally and save them just like I had done every time before. Another message popped up immediately after. Hello, Nia. The attendant is looking at us weird. Fix this. I set my tea down and picked up the device. My thumb hovered over the screen. I could picture them perfectly. Kyle standing by the pump in his designer joggers, trying to look important while his card was rejected. Jasmine pouting in the passenger seat. My parents in the back complaining about the delay. They were stuck in a gas station in Indiana, miles from luxury, with a tank full of entitlement and pockets full of plastic that was now worth less than the lint in their seams. I did not type a reply. I did not explain. I simply tapped the information icon next to Kyle's name. I scrolled past 2 years of texts asking for loans, investment capital, and favors. I reached the bottom of the menu and pressed the red text that said block caller. A confirmation window popped up. You will no longer receive calls or messages from this contact. I tapped confirm. The phone in my hand went still. The vibration stopped. The connection was severed. I placed the phone back on the coaster, face down this time. They were alone now. Truly alone. The realization would hit them slowly at first, then all at once. The gas pump would not turn on. The hotel reservation for tonight would be canceled. The dinner they planned to eat would not be served. They were about to experience the one thing I had protected them from their entire lives. Consequences. The war had officially begun, and I had just fired the first shot without saying a single word. The peace of my sanctuary was not broken gently, it was assassinated. I was sitting on the sofa adjusting the heating pad against my stomach when the heavy oak front door shuddered on its hinges. Bam, bam, bam. The sound was violent, animalistic, the kind of pounding you hear when the police are conducting a raid. My heart leaped into my throat, triggering a fresh spasm of pain in my incision. Before I could even reach for my cane to stand up, I heard the metallic jingle that made my blood run cold. Keys. In the haze of surgery and recovery, I had made a critical error. I had forgotten to retrieve the emergency spare key I gave my mother 3 years ago. The lock tumbled with a sharp click. The door flew open with such force that the handle smashed into the plaster of the hallway wall, leaving a dent. And just like that, the 4 people I had successfully blocked from my phone were standing in my foyer, bringing the chaos I had tried to escape right into my living room. My mother Wanda led the charge. She did not look like the glamorous woman from the Instagram photos anymore. Her hair was frizzy from the humidity, her designer tracksuit was wrinkled, and her face was twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She did not look at the walker standing next to me. She did not look at the pale complexion of her daughter, who was recovering from organ failure. She looked straight at me, with eyes that burned with hatred. "Are you insane?" she screamed, her voice cracking as it bounced off the high ceilings. "Are you trying to kill your own parents? Is that what this is? Some kind of sick power trip?" She stormed into the living room, throwing her Louis Vuitton purse onto the floor with a heavy thud. My father. Desmond followed close behind, his face tight with a mixture of exhaustion and fury. Jasmine and Kyle trailed in the rear, looking like sullen teenagers who had been denied their allowance. "Mom." I started to say, my voice weak, but she cut me off with a wave of her hand. Do not you dare speak to me until you explain why my card was declined at a gas station in Gary, Indiana, she shrieked. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? We were stranded, Nia. Stranded for 2 hours until Kyle had to call a friend to Venmo him cash. We are your parents. We raised you. We sacrificed everything for you. And this is how you repay us, by cutting us off in the middle of a trip. She was pacing now, circling the coffee table like a shark. You knew we were driving home today, she spat. You did this on purpose. You wanted us to suffer. What kind of monster does that to their family? I sat there gripping the armrest of the sofa watching the performance. It was breathtaking in its narcissism. Not once in her tirade did she ask if I was okay. Not once did she ask how the surgery went. She did not see a daughter recovering from a near-death experience. She only saw a malfunctioning wallet that had inconvenienced her afternoon. The sheer audacity of her anger was the final confirmation I needed. They had not broken in to check on me. They had broken in to demand why the money had stopped flowing. I stood there, leaning heavily on my walker, waiting for the question that I knew deep down would never come. I waited for someone, anyone, to look at the bandages visible under my thin robe. I waited for them to notice the pallor of my skin, or the way my hands trembled from weakness. But their eyes slid right over my physical trauma as if I were invisible. To them, I wasn't a human being recovering from emergency surgery. I was a broken vending machine that needed to be kicked until it started dispensing cash again. Jasmine stepped forward, pushing past our mother. She looked immaculate in her designer travel gear, her hair perfectly blown out, but her face was twisted into a scowl I had known since childhood. It was the look she gave when she didn't get the biggest slice of cake at a birthday party, only now the stakes were much higher. Do you have any idea what you did to me today? She whined, her voice pitching up into a frequency that grated against my headache. I was at the counter, Nia. The bag was right there. It was the limited edition Dionysus. The sales lady looked at me like I was a criminal when that card declined. I had to leave it there, on the counter, like a peasant. She threw her hands up the gold bracelets on her wrists, bracelets I had paid for clinking together. I have a reputation to maintain. She continued, her eyes wet with angry tears. People were watching. I could see them whispering. You humiliated me for no reason other than your own petty jealousy. You need to call the bank right now and authorize the charge. I can call the store and have them ship it overnight if we fix this in the next hour. She didn't ask if I was in pain. She asked for a purse. Then it was Kyle's turn. He stepped up beside his wife, crossing his arms over his chest, trying to look intimidating. He failed. He just looked like a leech in expensive sneakers. And the gas station, Nia. Seriously. Uncool, he muttered, shaking his head as if I had committed a grave social faux pas. I had to call a buddy and beg him to Venmo me cash just to get the pump to turn on. Do you know how bad that looks? I am trying to build a brand as a venture capitalist. I cannot be seen scraping for loose change at a pump in the middle of Indiana. I had to use my own personal savings to pay for the tank. My own personal savings. The phrase hung in the air. He was outraged that he had to spend $60 of his own money to fuel the car he was driving to transport himself home. He felt entitled to my wallet even for the most basic necessity of his own life. You owe me for that, Kyle added, pointing a finger at me. And for the dinner last night. I had to put it on my debit card. You need to transfer $3,000 to my account to cover the inconvenience and the interest. I looked at my father, Desmond. Surely he, the deacon, the man of God, would see the insanity of this. Surely he would look at his daughter fresh out of the hospital and tell them to stop. But he just shook his head, his expression one of profound disappointment. You have really let the devil into your heart, Nia, he said softly. Using money to control your family. Punishing your sister because you are bitter about her success. It is ugly, Nia. Real ugly. The irony was so thick I could taste it like bile. They were standing in my house screaming at me for cutting off the funds for their luxury lifestyle while accusing me of being the one who cared too much about money. Not one of them asked about the surgery. Not one. The verdict was in. They didn't care if I lived or died as long as the checks didn't bounce. And that realization gave me the strength to do what came next. My father Desmond stepped forward, placing a calming hand on my mother's shaking shoulder. He did not scream. That would have been beneath him. He was a deacon, a pillar of the community, a man who prided himself on his gravitas. He adjusted his silk tie, took a deep breath, and looked down at me from his full height. From where I sat slumped on the sofa, he looked like a giant, a distorted monument of paternal authority looming over a crumbling city. "Nia, look at me," he commanded, his voice deep and resonant, the same tone he used to shame sinners during the Sunday service altar call. "I am not angry. I am just deeply disappointed. We raised you better than this. We raised you to understand the importance of the tribe." He began to pace slowly in front of me, his hands clasped behind his back, turning my living room into his personal pulpit. "You know our history, Nia. You know what our people have been through. We do not have the luxury of individualism. That is a mindset for people who have never had to fight for their existence. In our culture, when one of us makes it, we all make it. We lift as we climb. That is the covenant." He stopped and pointed a finger at my chest, his eyes narrowing. "But you have climbed to the top of this mountain, and now you want to kick the ladder down so your sister cannot follow. You are sitting here in this penthouse surrounded by white walls and white neighbors, and you have forgotten where you came from. You have forgotten the sacrifices we made. We put food on the table when times were hard. We pushed you to study. We prayed for your success. And now that God has blessed you, you think that blessing belongs only to you. That is a sin, Nia. That is a sin against the ancestors who bled so you could sit in this air conditioning." I stared at him, my mouth slightly open. The audacity was suffocating. He was talking about sacrifices, yet I was the one who had paid off their mortgage 3 years ago. I was the one who paid for the very suit he was wearing. "Your sister, Jasmine," he continued, softening his voice to a sickeningly sweet register. "She is a delicate spirit. She was not built for the hardness of this world like you were. We protected her. We want her to have the soft life we never had. And instead of helping us protect her, instead of being the big sister who paves the way, you are acting out of bitterness. You are punishing her because she shines in a way you do not." He leaned down, bringing his face close to mine, smelling of expensive cologne and hypocrisy. "This is not about money, Nia. This is about loyalty. It is about honoring your father and your mother so that your days may be long. Right now, you are shortening your days with this stress you are causing us. Do the right thing. Apologize to your mother. Apologize to your sister. Turn the cards back on and let us put this ugly chapter behind us. Do not make me tell the church that my eldest daughter has lost her soul to greed." He straightened up, adjusting his cuffs, waiting for me to break. He expected me to cry. He expected me to beg for forgiveness for the crime of having boundaries. He expected the old Nia. But looking at him, listening to him weaponize our heritage to justify his parasitism, I felt the last tether of guilt snap. He had just invoked the ancestors to defend his right to drive a luxury car he didn't pay for. It was the most disgusting sermon I had ever heard. I let his words hang in the air for a long, suffocating moment. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen and the sound of my own shallow breathing. I did not scream. I did not cry. I simply leaned forward, gripping the handles of my walker until my knuckles turned white, and looked my father directly in the eye. The camera of my mind zoomed in, focusing on the sweat beading on his upper lip as he realized his sermon had failed to land. "Ancestors." I repeated, my voice low and steady, vibrating with a cold intensity that froze the room. "You want to talk about ancestors, Dad? You want to talk about the history of our people? Tell me, Desmond, which ancestor was it? Was it great-grandfather Otis, who worked the fields until his hands bled? Did he teach you that a VIP concert ticket is worth more than your firstborn child's life? Or was it Grandma Rose? Did she teach you to leave your daughter dying on a bathroom floor Because you didn't want to miss the opening act? My father's mouth opened, then closed. He looked like a fish pulled out of water. He took a step back, his confidence crumbling under the weight of the truth. You talk about the tribe. I continued, my voice rising just enough to cut through his defenses. The tribe protects its own. The tribe does not leave a woman and her 2 babies alone in the middle of the night to hemorrhage. I called you. I begged you. And you did not pray for me. You did not rush to me. You did math. You calculated that $5,000 for a seat was worth more than my heartbeat. Do not you dare stand there in the suit that I bought you and preach to me about loyalty. You bankrupt your moral authority the moment you chose a pop star over your own flesh and blood. I turned my gaze to my mother, who was clutching her purse like a shield. And you, Mom. You are worried about a declined card. I was worried about my children becoming orphans. I had to pay a stranger $200 an hour to hold my hand because the woman who gave birth to me was too busy taking selfies. The silence that followed was absolute. It was a deathly, suffocating silence. My mother stopped pacing. Jasmine stopped crying. Kyle stopped checking his phone. For the first time in their lives, they were not the victims. They were not the heroes. They were the villains in their own story, and the mirror I was holding up was showing them exactly who they were. They looked at each other, desperate for a defense, for a gaslighting tactic, for anything to shift the blame back to me. But there was nothing. The truth was naked in the center of the room, and it was ugly. I picked up my cane and pointed it at the door. The tip of the rubber stopper was the only judge and jury I needed. Get out, I whispered. Get out of my house. Get out of my life. And take your culture of parasitism with you. You have 30 days to vacate the villa. Every second you stand here arguing is a second you could be using to pack. For a moment nobody moved, then slowly the reality of their situation began to sink in. The ATM was broken, the bank was closed, and the daughter they had used for parts was finally putting herself back together. My mother gathered her scattered dignity and her Louis Vuitton bag, her hands shaking with a mix of rage and humiliation. Jasmine was sobbing quietly, a sound that usually broke my heart, but today just sounded like noise pollution. My father cast one last judgmental look at me, shaking his head as if I were a lost cause, a sheep that had strayed too far from the shepherd. They turned to the door, a defeated army retreating from the battlefield. But Kyle did not move immediately. He stood by the entryway, watching his wife and my parents walk out into the hallway. Then he turned back to me. The mask of the supportive brother-in-law, the goofy guy who just liked sneakers and video games, slipped off completely. Underneath was something cold, calculating, and reptilian. He looked around my penthouse, his eyes lingering on the expensive art on the walls, and the view of the city skyline, calculating the net worth of the room. You think you are smart, do not you? Nia, he said, his voice low enough so the others would not hear. You think because you write the checks you own the people. I tightened my grip on my walker, fighting the urge to sit down as my legs began to tremble from the effort of standing. I do not own people, Kyle, I replied, keeping my voice steady. I just refuse to rent them anymore. Goodbye. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound that sent a shiver down my spine. He took a step closer, invading my personal space. You clearly have not checked the statutes in this state, he sneered, a smug grin spreading across his face. You are so busy being a CEO that you forgot to read the fine print on family law. There are things called filial responsibility laws. Look it up. Children with means are legally required to support destitute parents who cannot care for themselves. I stared at him, my blood running cold. I had heard of such laws, archaic rules rarely enforced, but the fact that Kyle knew about them meant he had been doing his homework. He had been preparing for this day. You cannot just cut them off because you got your feelings hurt. He continued, his tone dripping with arrogance. If they go broke because of your eviction, the state comes after you to recover the costs. You are the cash cow, Nia, and we are going to milk you one way or another. So go ahead, evict them, cancel the cards. We will just sue you for support. And with your income, the judge is going to award us a lot more than $15,000 a month. You might want to get that checkbook ready again, big sister." He winked. He actually winked at me. Then he turned on his heel, walked out the door, and slammed it shut with a force that rattled the windows. I stood there in the silence, the adrenaline fading, replaced by a new kind of fear. This was not just a family squabble anymore. Kyle had just declared war, and he planned to use the legal system as his weapon. I needed a drink, and then I needed the best lawyer in Chicago. The silence that followed Kyle's threat was thick enough to choke on. He stood there smug and expecting fear, but he had miscalculated. He was playing checkers while I had been mastering chess for a decade. I slowly lifted my phone, the screen still glowing, and held it up like a weapon. My thumb hovered over the emergency call button. "You have exactly 10 seconds to vacate my property," I said, my voice dropping to a register that was dangerously calm. "If you are still standing on my marble foyer when I reach 0, I am dialing 911. I will report a home invasion. I will tell the officers that my estranged family broke in and threatened a woman recovering from surgery. Think about how that police report will look to the church board dad. Think about how that mugshot will look on your influencer feed, Jasmine. 1, 2, 3. The color drained from my father's face. The threat of public scandal was the only thing that terrified him more than poverty. He grabbed my mother's arm, pulling her toward the exit. Jasmine looked at me with pure venom spitting on my floor before turning on her heel. Kyle gave me one last lingering glare, a promise of future retribution, before following them out. 10 seconds later, the heavy oak door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the penthouse like a gunshot. The vibration traveled up my legs, and my knees finally gave out. I collapsed onto the sofa, the adrenaline leaving my body and taking all my strength with it. Ms. Hattie was beside me in an instant, helping me lie down, adjusting the ice pack on my side. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. The look of sorrow in her eyes said enough. But I didn't have time to rest. They still had a key. As long as that piece of metal existed in their possession, I was not safe. I reached for my phone again, my fingers trembling. I searched for a 24-hour locksmith. I found one with a 5-star rating who promised a 30-minute arrival time. I dialed. "I need an emergency rekey," I told the dispatcher. "Yes, tonight. Right now. Price is not an issue. I need high-security deadbolts. I need peace of mind." 40 minutes later, a man named Mr. Miller was kneeling at my front door. The sound of his drill grinding into the metal was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. It was the sound of severance. Every screw he removed was a tie I was cutting. Every old tumbler he discarded was a boundary I was enforcing. He worked efficiently, sensing the tension in the house. When he was finished, he handed me a set of heavy silver keys. They felt cold and solid in my palm. "This is a restricted keyway, ma'am," he explained. "Unless they have this card, they cannot duplicate it. You are the only one who can let someone in." I closed my fingers around the keys, feeling the jagged edges bite into my skin. It was done. They were locked out. But as I stared at the new deadbolt, I thought about Kyle's threat. Filial responsibility laws, a lawsuit. They were not just going to go away. They were going to try to drag me into the mud with them. I limped over to the window, looking down at the street where their car had driven away. If Kyle wanted a legal battle, I would give him one. But he was forgetting one thing. He was fighting a war with a lawyer he couldn't afford, against a woman who signed the paychecks for the best legal team in the city. I turned the new lock with a satisfying click. Let them come. I was ready. Sunday morning at Greater Mount Zion had always been my sanctuary. It was the one place where I could take off the armor of the CEO and just be Nia. But as I stepped out of my car that morning, adjusting the brim of my white hat, I felt a shift in the atmosphere. The air didn't feel like fellowship, it felt like judgment. I walked up the concrete steps, my cane clicking rhythmically against the stone. Usually the ushers at the door greeted me with warm hugs and questions about the twins. Today, Sister Bernice, a woman who had known me since I was in diapers, barely made eye contact. She handed me a bulletin with a stiff mechanical motion, her smile tight and artificial. "Good morning, Sister Bernice. I said, trying to maintain my composure. She mumbled something indistinguishable and turned away to greet the family behind me with exaggerated enthusiasm. The message was clear. I was persona non grata in the house of the Lord. As I walked down the center aisle, the whispers started. In a black church, the gossip network is faster than fiber optic internet. I could feel the eyes boring into my back. I saw heads leaning together, covered by ornate hats, sharing the poison my mother had undoubtedly distilled for them. Did you hear she put them out on the street? I heard she stopped paying for her father's heart medication. Money changes people. It is a shame. The words floated around me like toxic spores. My mother Wanda was sitting in the third pew, the prime spot for the performance she was currently staging. She wasn't wearing her usual Sunday best. She was dressed in a drab older dress I hadn't seen in years, looking small and frail. She was dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief, surrounded by a circle of comforting church mothers who were rubbing her back and shooting daggers at me. She had flipped the script perfectly. In her version of the story, she was the sacrificial mother who had given everything to raise a successful daughter only to be discarded like trash the moment that daughter got rich. She didn't tell them about the VIP tickets. She didn't tell them about the surgery. She didn't tell them about the $15,000 a month. She only told them that she was homeless and heartbroken. I found a seat near the back, isolated in a pew that remained empty even as the church filled up. It was a strategic isolation. No one wanted to be seen sitting next to the woman who abandoned her parents. I sat straight, my spine stiff, refusing to slouch or look ashamed. I opened my Bible, but the words blurred on the page. I realized then that my mother was willing to burn down my reputation in the one place that mattered most to my soul, just to punish me for closing her line of credit. She wasn't seeking sympathy. She was seeking to destroy my character, so I would have no choice but to pay her to stop. But as the choir stood up to sing, I made a silent vow. I would not pay. I would not break. If I had to worship alone in a room full of people, so be it. God knew the truth, and eventually the congregation would too. I thought the church gossip was the bottom of the barrel, but I had underestimated the depth of my sister's desperation for attention. On Tuesday morning, my publicist sent me a link with the subject line, "Urgent, do not watch alone." I sat at my mahogany desk, the city of Chicago sprawling below me, and tapped the link. It opened TikTok. The video had been posted 3 hours ago. It already had 1.2 million views. The frame was vertical. Jasmine was sitting on the floor of what looked like a cheap motel room, though I suspected she had just staged a corner of the villa to look destitute. She was wearing no makeup, her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and she was wearing an oversized gray hoodie. She looked small, vulnerable, and completely unrecognizable from the girl who had demanded a Gucci bag 2 days ago. She sniffled, wiping a non-existent tear from her cheek, and began her performance. "Hey guys," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I really did not want to make this video. I usually only share the happy parts of my life, but I feel like I owe you an explanation for why I have been so quiet. My family is going through something really traumatic right now." She took a deep, shaky breath. The comments were already scrolling by at lightning speed. "Poor baby. We are here for you." "What happened?" "My sister?" She continued, looking down at her hands. "You guys know her, the CEO, the success story. Well, she decided she does not want a family anymore. She kicked our parents out. My dad is 60 years old. My mom has high blood pressure. And she threw us out on the street because we asked her for help with groceries." Then came the masterstroke. She held up her phone to the camera and played an audio recording. It was grainy, recorded secretly during our confrontation in my penthouse. But it was not the whole conversation. It was a chop shop edit. She played my voice saying, "You have 30 days to vacate. Get out of my life." She cut out the part where I talked about the surgery. She cut out the part about the $15,000 a month. She cut out the part where they abandoned me to die. All the audience heard was a cold, heartless, rich woman evicting her elderly parents. The audio ended, and Jasmine looked back at the camera, her eyes wide and pleading. We are trying to figure out where to go. I do not understand how someone can have so much money and no heart. Please pray for us. The video ended on a freeze frame of her sad face. I scrolled down to the comments. They were a firing squad. Dox her. Cancel her business. This is why I hate the rich. She is a monster. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. This was not just a tantrum. This was a calculated assassination of my character. Jasmine had weaponized the internet against me. She knew she could not win in a court of law, so she had taken the case to the court of public opinion, where facts did not matter and emotion was king. She had painted a target on my back, and 1 million people were currently loading their weapons. I put the phone down, my hands shaking with a mixture of rage and terror. The war had just escalated from a family dispute to a public relations nightmare. I needed to respond, but I knew that in the world of social media, the truth is often the first casualty. The view from my corner office on the 42nd floor was usually my greatest source of calm. It was a testament to every late night, every skipped vacation, and every sacrifice I had made to build my fintech empire. But today, the sprawling skyline of Chicago looked less like a kingdom and more like a prison of glass and steel. The air conditioning was humming a low, monotonous note that did nothing to cool the heat rising in my cheeks. Across the sleek obsidian conference table sat Marcus Sterling, the managing partner of the venture capital firm that was set to lead our Series B funding round. Usually, Marcus was warm, cracking jokes about golf and the market. Today, he was a statue. On the table between us lay his tablet face up. I did not need to look at the screen to know what was on it. Jasmine's tear-stained face was paused in high definition. The video had jumped from TikTok to Twitter, and now it was trending on LinkedIn. The caption underneath the repost read, "CEO of the Year" or "Daughter of the Year, you decide." Nia Marcus began, his voice devoid of its usual camaraderie. "We have a problem." I folded my hands on the table, fighting to keep them steady. "It is a personal matter, Marcus. It has no bearing on the company's financials or our technology. The numbers are solid. You know that." Marcus sighed, leaning back in his leather chair. He looked at me not with anger, but with a cold corporate pragmatism that was somehow worse. "It is not about the numbers, Nia. It is about the optics. Our firm has a strict morality clause in our investment charter. We invest in leaders, not just algorithms. And right now, the narrative out there is that our potential partner evicts her elderly parents and mocks their poverty." He tapped the tablet with a manicured finger. "The board is skittish. We are about to sign a $50 million deal. We cannot have the face of that deal embroiled in a domestic scandal that involves allegations of neglect." The word hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Neglect. I had paid for his heart surgery. I had paid for the roof over his head. I had neglected my own health to ensure their comfort. And now I was being lectured on ethics by a man who didn't know the half of it. "Marcus, these are lies," I said, my voice hardening. "It is a smear campaign launched by family members who are angry that I cut off their allowance. I have proof. I have receipts." "Then release them," Marcus countered sharply. "Because right now silence looks like guilt. And we cannot afford guilt. Until this clears up, until the public sentiment shifts, we are pausing the deal." The room spun. Pausing the deal meant stagnation. It meant layoffs. It meant the company I built from the ground up was in jeopardy because my sister wanted a new handbag. "You are pausing the funding?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "We are pausing everything," Marcus confirmed, standing up and buttoning his jacket. "Fix this, Nia. Fix your family. Or do not expect us to answer your calls next week." He walked out, leaving me alone in the silent glass box. I stared at the tablet. My sister's face seemed to mock me from the screen. She had not just attacked my character, she had attacked my livelihood. She was trying to starve me out just like she claimed I had done to them. But she had made a fatal error. She thought she was fighting a sister. She forgot she was fighting a CEO. And CEOs do not crumble under pressure. We pivot. The knock on my door that evening was not aggressive like the invasion 3 days ago. It was polite, rhythmic, and purely bureaucratic. I opened the door to find a man in a generic gray suit holding a large manila envelope. He did not smile. He did not introduce himself. He simply asked if I was Nia Brooks. When I nodded, he thrust the envelope into my hands, muttered the words "You are served," and walked away without looking back. I carried the package into my kitchen and laid it on the marble island. My hands were steady now. The shock of the last week had burned away my nerves, leaving only a cold, hard resolve. I tore open the seal. Inside was a stack of legal documents thick enough to be a novella. The cover page bore the seal of the Superior Court, and the bold capitalized words that made my stomach turn. Civil complaint for support. Plaintiff Desmond and Wanda Brooks versus defendant Nia Brooks. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the legalese. It was exactly what Kyle had threatened. They were invoking filial responsibility statutes. The lawsuit claimed that my parents were destitute, unable to provide for their own basic needs, and that I, their wealthy daughter, had the financial means to support them, but was maliciously refusing to do so. They were not just asking for help. They were demanding a court-ordered stipend. I read the itemized list of their alleged needs. It was a work of fiction that bordered on comedy. They claimed they needed $6,000 a month for housing suitable for their health conditions. They claimed they needed $2,000 for dietary restrictions. They listed transportation costs, medical copays, and emotional distress therapy. The total monthly demand was $22,000. They were suing me for a salary. But as I read the supporting affidavit, I saw the true author of this farce. My father's vocabulary was limited to scripture and sports metaphors. My mother wrote in emojis and passive-aggressive hints. This document was precise. It cited precedents. It used terms like established standard of living and implied contract of care. This was Kyle. He had found a lawyer willing to take the case on contingency, probably promising them a cut of the settlement he was sure I would pay to avoid bad press. Kyle was betting on my shame. He was betting that the CEO of a fintech company would write a check to make a public lawsuit go away. He thought he had me cornered. He thought the video on TikTok combined with this lawsuit would break me. I picked up my phone and took a picture of the summons. I sent it to Mr. Henderson with a 2-word caption. Wartime. I walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. They wanted to use the law to shackle me to them forever. They wanted to make their parasitism legal and binding. But they had made a critical mistake. In a court of law, you have to prove your claims under oath. You have to open your financials to discovery. You have to answer questions about where the money went. Kyle had just invited a forensic accountant into his life, and he had no idea that he had just handed me the weapon that would destroy him. I thought the demand for $22,000 a month was the declaration of war, but as I turned the page of the legal complaint, I realized it was just the opening salvo. Page 42 contained a petition that made my blood freeze in my veins. It was titled, Petition for Grandparent Visitation Rights. Under the subsection of alienation of affection, my parents, guided by the snake-like wisdom of Kyle, were suing for court-mandated time with Leo and Maya. They claimed that I was an unstable mother who was damaging the children's emotional well-being by severing the bond with their loving grandparents. They requested unsupervised weekends. Unsupervised. The word echoed in my mind like a threat. These were the people who left me on a bathroom floor. These were the people who ignored my children's screams to go to a concert. And now they wanted to take them away from me for 48 hours at a time. I looked over at the living room rug, where Leo and Maya were building a tower out of blocks. They were innocent. They were soft. They were everything my family was not. I knew exactly what this was. They did not want to bake cookies or read bedtime stories. They wanted hostages. They knew that the quickest way to get me to open my wallet was to threaten the safety of my children. If they had the twins, they had leverage. They could demand money for clothes for outings for emergencies that did not exist. They wanted to turn my children into little ATMs. A cold fury settled over me, heavier and darker than anything I had felt before. Money was one thing, reputation was another. But coming for my children, that was a suicide mission. I closed the legal folder with a snap. I was done playing defense. I was done waiting for the law to protect me. I needed a weapon that would obliterate their credibility so thoroughly that no judge in America would let them within 500 feet of my family. I needed the nuclear option. I picked up my phone and dialed Henderson again. I did not want to just win the case. I wanted to expose the rot. I told him to hire a private investigator. I told him to pull the security footage from the night of the surgery. And then I told him to find the file I had kept buried for 5 years. The file about Kyle. If they wanted to talk about who was fit to be around children, we were going to talk about everything. I walked over to the twins and pulled them into a tight embrace, breathing in the scent of their shampoo. I would burn the world down before I let those monsters use my babies as bargaining chips. The time for mercy was over. It was time for a knockout. I drove to the outskirts of the city where the skyline faded into strip malls and modest ranch houses. My destination was Cedar Grove Senior Living, a quiet facility where I paid $5,000 a month to keep my grandfather Otis in comfort. My father Desmond rarely visited. He told everyone at church that Otis was senile, a husk of a man whose mind had been eaten away by dementia. He used Grandpa's condition as a prop to garner sympathy, sighing loudly about the burden of caring for an aging parent, even though he never spent a dime on his care. I walked into room 304 expecting to find a confused old man staring at the wall. Instead, I found Otis sitting in his armchair reading a newspaper with a pair of reading glasses perched on his nose. The moment the door clicked shut, he folded the paper and looked at me with eyes that were sharp, clear, and utterly devoid of confusion. "I wondered when you were finally going to stop being their mule," he said, his voice raspy but strong. I froze, my hands still on the doorknob. "Grandpa," I whispered, "Dad said you did not recognize anyone anymore. He said you thought it was 1975. Otis chuckled, a dry sound like autumn leaves crunching. "Your daddy says a lot of things, Naya. Acting crazy is the only way I can get him to stop asking me for my pension check. If he thinks I am gone, he cannot guilt-trip me into buying him a new suit. I have been playing possum for 5 years, baby girl. It is the only peace I get." He gestured for me to sit on the edge of the bed. I sat stunned by the revelation. The man my family had dismissed as a burden was actually the smartest person in the bloodline. He had seen the parasitism long before I did. He had engaged in a silent protest of incompetence just to survive them. "I am in trouble, Grandpa," I admitted, my voice cracking. "They are suing me. They want to take the twins. They say I am abandoning the family." Otis did not look surprised. He leaned over the side of his armchair and reached for a small, battered metal box tucked underneath the radiator. He pulled a key from a chain around his neck and unlocked it. Inside was a thick black leather notebook. The cover was worn, the corners peeling. It looked like an artifact from another century. "Desmond likes to talk about the ancestors," Otis said, handing me the book. "He likes to talk about how we help each other. Well, this is the real history of how Desmond helps people." I called it the ledger. I opened the book. The pages were filled with handwriting that dated back 30 years. It was a detailed record of every loan my father had taken and never repaid. Every family member he had scammed. Every church fund he had dipped into. There were dates, amounts, signatures. It was a forensic accounting of a lifetime of grifting. "Your daddy stole from his own mother's funeral fund," Otis said, his voice hard. "He stole from my savings when I was in the hospital. He has been using people his whole life." I wrote it all down. I knew one day he would come for the one person who actually had something worth taking. "That is you, Nia." I ran my fingers over the ink. This was not just a notebook. It was a smoking gun. It was proof that the poverty my parents claimed was not bad luck, but a pattern of theft and mismanagement. Take it, Otis commanded. He wants to drag you into court. You drag the truth in there with you. Show the judge who Desmond Brooks really is. I clutched the book to my chest, feeling the weight of the secrets inside. My grandfather had given me the ultimate weapon. He had preserved the truth in a world of lies. I kissed his forehead, thanking him for his silence and his strategy. I walked out of Cedar Grove with the ledger in my purse. My father wanted to talk about history. I was about to give him a history lesson he would never forget. The courier arrived at my penthouse door at 10 in the morning, delivering a square, heavy envelope sealed with actual wax. I held it in my hand, feeling the weight of the creamy linen stock. It was expensive. The kind of stationery you order for a wedding or a state dinner, not a casual family gathering. I slid a letter opener under the flap and pulled out the card. The gold foil lettering shimmered under the foyer lights. You are cordially invited to an early celebration of life for Otis Brooks. 80 years of blessings. I let out a short, dry laugh. Otis's birthday was not for another 3 months. They were not throwing a party because they loved him. They were throwing a party because they needed a stage. I looked at the venue. It was being held at the villa on Oak Street, the very house I had evicted them from, with the date set for this coming Sunday. That was exactly 2 days before the eviction notice expired. This was not an olive branch, it was a trap. I could see the strategy clearly, as if Kyle had drawn it on a whiteboard. They knew they could not bully me in private anymore. I had blocked their numbers. I had changed my locks. So they were shifting tactics to public shame. They would invite the entire extended family. The aunts who loved to gossip, the cousins who needed loans, and probably the pastor and the church deacons. They would crowd everyone into that living room, wheel out my grandfather like a prop, and create a pressure cooker of social expectation. The script was predictable. My father would make a toast about family unity. My mother would cry about how hard it was to keep the family together in these trying times. Then in front of everyone they would present me with a paper to sign. Maybe a renewal of the lease. Maybe a check. And if I refused, if I said no in front of Auntie Sarah and Deacon Jones, I would be the villain. I would be the heartless rich girl ruining her grandfather's dying wish. It was an ambush disguised as a birthday cake. They were banking on my silence. They were banking on the fact that I was too polite, too well raised to cause a scene at an 80-year-old man's party. They thought I would crumble under the collective gaze of the tribe. But they had made a critical error in their calculations. They thought they were inviting the victim back into the fold. They did not know that the victim had visited Otis yesterday. They did not know that the senile old man they planned to use as a centerpiece had armed me with 30 years of evidence. I walked over to my desk and placed the invitation next to the black leather ledger I had retrieved from the nursing home. The contrast was striking. The invitation was a lie wrapped in gold foil. The ledger was the dirty, unvarnished truth bound in worn leather. I tapped the card with a freshly manicured fingernail. I would go. Oh, I would absolutely go. But I would not be bringing a gift. I would be bringing the apocalypse. I pulled out my phone and texted my lawyer, Mr. Henderson. Clear my schedule for Sunday afternoon. I have a family engagement. Then I went to my closet to pick out a dress. If I was going to a war zone, I intended to look like the conqueror, not the casualty. The driveway of the villa on Oak Street was packed with cars, a testament to the effectiveness of the guilt trip my parents had unleashed on the community. I steered my vehicle into the last available spot, took a deep breath, and checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I had chosen my outfit with the precision of a general preparing for battle. I was not wearing the soft pastels of a submissive daughter. I was wearing a bespoke, stark white power suit. It was sharp, tailored, and unapologetically expensive. In a room full of people determined to paint me as the villain, I intended to look like the angel of judgment. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath my heels. As I walked toward the front door, I could hear the hum of conversation from inside. But the moment I crossed the threshold, the sound died. It was immediate and absolute. The silence rippled through the crowded living room, like a wave freezing wine glasses in midair and silencing laughter in throats. Every head turned, every pair of eyes locked onto me. The scene before me was a masterclass in manipulation. My mother Wanda had staged the room to look like a wake. She was sitting in the corner on a folding chair, not the plush velvet sofa she loved, wearing a drab gray dress that looked 2 sizes too big. She held a tissue to her nose, her shoulders slumped in a posture of exaggerated defeat. Beside her, my father Desmond stood with his hand on her shoulder, looking like a weary prophet carrying the weight of the world. They had removed the expensive art from the walls. They had replaced the crystal vases with cheap plastic cups. They had dressed the set to scream poverty to the audience of aunts, uncles, and church deacons who surrounded them. I felt the heat of the room's hostility. It was physical, a wall of judgment radiating from the people I had known my entire life. To them, I was the Judas in a blazer. I was the ungrateful child who had abandoned her aging parents to the wolves. I saw Aunt Sarah shake her head in disgust. I saw Deacon Jones turn his back to me. They had swallowed the lie whole. But it was Kyle who drew my attention. He was standing near the makeshift bar, leaning casually against the counter. He was not looking at me with disgust. He was looking at me with triumph. He swirled his drink, a smirk playing on his lips, his eyes dancing with the arrogance of a man who believes he has just checkmated the queen. He thought the silence was my punishment. He thought the glare of the community would make me crumble, force me to my knees, and make me sign whatever document they had hidden in the kitchen. I did not shrink. I did not look down. I tightened my grip on my clutch, feeling the hard outline of the black leather ledger inside. I lifted my chin, met Kyle's gaze with a cold, dead stare, and took my first step into the room. The clicking of my heels on the hardwood floor sounded like a clock counting down. They wanted a show. They wanted a villain. I decided right then and there to give them a performance they would talk about for the rest of their lives. I walked straight through the crowd, parting the sea of judgment, with nothing but the sheer force of my presence. The trap was sprung, but the prey was armed. The sound of a silver spoon tapping against a crystal glass cut through the murmurs like a gavel striking a sounding block. My father Desmond stood at the head of the long dining table. The room began to feel like a carousel spinning out of control, the faces of my aunts, uncles, and cousins blurring into a singular mural of judgment. The air was thick with the scent of cheap cologne and potluck casseroles, a suffocating mixture that made my stomach turn. Desmond cleared his throat, a sound that demanded absolute reverence. He looked at the crowd, then at Otis, who sat silently in his wheelchair, and finally he let his heavy gaze land on me. He did not look angry. He looked tragically wounded, a performance worthy of an Academy Award. "Family," he began, his voice trembling with practiced emotion. "We are gathered here to honor my father, a man who taught me the value of sacrifice. And looking at him, I am reminded of the sacrifices Wanda and I made." He paused, wiping a non-existent tear from his eye. The room leaned in. "We went without so our children could have. We worked double shifts until our backs broke. We ate the crumbs so they could have the feast. We did it because that is what parents do. We give until we are empty." He began to walk around the table, his pace slow and deliberate, circling me like a predator circling prey. The movement made me dizzy, the room swirling around the white point of my suit. "And it breaks my heart," he continued, his voice rising, "that in our old age, instead of honor, we are met with coldness. We are met with eviction notices. We are met with silence from the very child we poured our souls into." A gasp went through the room. Aunt Sarah clucked her tongue. Someone whispered shame. Desmond stopped directly behind my chair. I could feel his body heat. I could feel the weight of his hand hovering near my shoulder, a threat disguised as affection. "Nia," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper that was loud enough for everyone to hear. "We do not want your money. We do not want your penthouse. We just want your love. We want you to remember who you are." He walked back to the head of the table and turned to face me, opening his arms wide. So I am asking you in front of God and your family. Apologize. Apologize to your mother for the tears she has cried this week. Apologize for locking us out of our home. Come back to us, Nia. Sign the lease renewal not because you have to, but because it is the right thing to do. Show us that your heart has not turned to stone. The room held its breath. They were waiting for me to break. They were waiting for the daughter to kneel. Desmond looked at me with a triumphant sorrow, convinced that the pressure of the tribe would crush my resistance. He thought he had trapped me in a spinning cage of guilt. He had no idea that I was the one holding the key to the exit and I was about to stop the ride. The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush bones. Desmond stood there with his hand extended, waiting for me to kiss the ring. The guests watched with bated breath, their eyes darting between the defiant daughter in the white suit and the benevolent father offering redemption. But the apology they were waiting for never came. Instead, a sharp metallic click echoed through the room like a pistol cocking. It was the sound of a wheel lock being disengaged. Desmond frowned and looked down at the wheelchair, annoyance flashing in his eyes. He opened his mouth to tell his father to sit still, likely preparing to shush him like a child. But the words died in his throat. Otis Brooks, the man they claimed was too senile to sign his own checks, placed his callous hands on the armrests of his chair. He did not tremble. He did not struggle. He pushed himself up with a strength that defied the narrative of decay they had sold to the church for 5 years. He rose slowly, unfolding his 6-foot frame until he towered over my father. From where I sat looking up, he looked like a risen king reclaiming his throne, or perhaps an Old Testament prophet descending from the mountain. The room erupted in a collective gasp. My mother dropped her tissue. Aunt Sarah covered her mouth with a hand that sparkled with costume jewelry. For years they had treated Otis like a piece of furniture, a prop to be wheeled out when they needed sympathy or a signature. They had forgotten that before he was a patient, he was a patriarch. He did not reach for a cane. He did not reach for a nurse. He took 3 steady, heavy steps toward the head of the table. Desmond took a stumbling step back, his eyes bulging with a mixture of confusion and terror. The lie was unraveling in real time. A senile man does not stand with that kind of authority. A weak man does not look at his son with eyes that burn like cold fire. Otis reached out and snatched the microphone from Desmond's limp hand. The feedback screeched through the speakers, a high-pitched wail that made everyone flinch, but Otis did not flinch. He held the microphone to his lips, and when he spoke, the voice that came out was not the raspy whisper of an invalid. It was a baritone rumble that shook the floorboards, deep and resonant and filled with a clarity that cut through the room like a scythe. "Sit down, Desmond," he commanded. It was not a request, it was an order. The sound boomed off the walls, silencing the murmurs instantly. "You have done enough lying for one lifetime." Otis continued, his gaze sweeping across the room, locking eyes with the church elders and the gossiping cousins. "You brought these people here for a show. You wanted a performance. Well, the Lord has given me my strength back for 5 minutes, and I intend to use it. Open your ears, because I am only going to say this once." He turned to me, and for the first time his face softened. But when he looked back at Desmond, the iron returned. "You called my granddaughter a traitor. But the only traitor in this room is wearing your suit." I stepped forward, pulling the heavy black notebook from my clutch. It felt dense, like a brick made of compressed secrets. I slid it across the polished mahogany table. It spun perfectly, sliding over the wood grain until it came to a stop right in front of Otis. He placed his large hand over the worn leather cover, taking a brief moment to feel the texture of decades of disappointment. Then, with a sudden surge of energy, he lifted it high and brought it down. Wham! The sound was violent. The china plates rattled against the wood. The water in the crystal glasses trembled. A fine cloud of dust rose from the binding, visible in the chandelier light. Otis flipped the cover open, the spine cracking loudly in the silent room. He adjusted his glasses and his eyes drilled into my father. "You want to talk about sacrifice?" Desmond Otis boomed, his voice filling every corner of the room. You want to tell these people how you struggled? Let us look at the receipts. Because I kept them all. He jabbed a finger at the first page. September 14th, 1985. You crashed your car drunk driving. You told your mother it was a mechanical failure. Who paid the damages to keep you out of jail? I did. $4,000. Status, never repaid. Desmond's face turned an ugly shade of gray. Dad, stop! He hissed, glancing nervously at the church deacon. This is not the time. Otis ignored him. He turned a chunk of pages, the paper crinkling loudly. June 1998. You stood in front of this same family and told them you were working double shifts to feed your children. You wept about your aching back. A lie. Otis looked up, his eyes blazing. I paid your mortgage for 6 years, Desmond. I bought the groceries that went into that refrigerator. I paid for the clothes on Nia's back because you were too busy chasing get-rich-quick schemes to hold down a job. You did not sacrifice a damn thing. You lived like a king on a pauper's pension. My pension. He slammed his hand on the page again. And then, when I ran dry, when you had bled me until I had nothing left but this wheelchair, you didn't get a job. Oh no, you just switched hosts. Look at page 50. The name changes. It stops saying Otis. It starts saying Nia. He spun the book around so the room could see. The columns were filled with red ink. Student loans, copied. Car payments, copied. The down payment on this very house, copied. You have never earned a living, son. You have only earned a living off of us. You are not a martyr. You are a parasite. And today the host is finally fighting back. Otis closed the book with a finality that echoed like a judge's gavel. He looked at the stunned crowd, at the aunts who had been judging me moments ago. You want to know why she evicted him? Because a man of 60 should not be breastfeeding from his daughter's bank account. The room was deathly quiet. The hero of the story had just been unmasked, and under the light of the truth, he looked small, pathetic, and utterly defeated. The camera zoomed in tight on Desmond's face, capturing the precise moment his soul seemed to leave his body. The blood had drained from his complexion so thoroughly that his skin took on the color of wet ash. Beads of sweat, cold and oily, broke out across his forehead, visibly catching the light of the chandelier he had claimed to pay for. His mouth opened and closed, a fish gasping on a dock, but no sound came out. The ledger lay on the table like a tombstone, but Otis was not finished burying him yet. Desmond finally found his voice, but it was not the booming baritone of the deacon anymore. It was a shrill, desperate screech. You are lying, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at his father. You are senile. You do not know what you are saying. This is my house. I have lived here for 20 years. My name is on the mail. My name is on the bills. You cannot come into my home and humiliate me like this. He turned to the crowd, his eyes wild, pleading for an ally. He is confused. The dementia makes him paranoid. I am the owner of this property. I have always been the owner. Nia is just trying to steal it from me. Otis did not shout back. He simply reached into the inside pocket of his tweed jacket and pulled out a long, crisp envelope. It was not worn like the ledger. It was fresh. The paper was bright white, and the seal was unbroken. He tapped the envelope against the edge of the table, a rhythmic, steady sound that silenced Desmond's frantic rambling. Your house? Otis repeated the words, dripping with disdain. That is the biggest lie you ever told, son, and you told it so many times I think you actually started to believe it. Otis slid a finger under the flap of the envelope and tore it open. He pulled out a legal document, the blue backing distinctive and official. He unfolded it, smoothing the creases with his heavy hand. 1999. Otis read aloud. That was the year I bought this place. You had just gone bankrupt trying to start that vitamin pyramid scheme. You had nowhere to go. You came to me crying, Desmond. Crying. You begged me for a roof over your head. So I bought this villa. I put it in my name because your credit score was lower than the temperature in February. He held the document up. The deed. The guest leaned in, squinting to see the bold black letters. Otis Brooks, he read, sole owner. You were never on the title, Desmond. You were never on the deed. You were a tenant. A tenant who did not pay rent. I let you pretend it was yours to save your pride. I let you walk around like the lord of the manor because I did not want my son to feel like a failure. But you took my kindness, and you turned it into a weapon against my granddaughter. Desmond looked like he was going to vomit. He gripped the back of his chair, his knuckles white. That does not matter, Desmond stammered, grasping at straws. You are incapacitated. You cannot make decisions. I have power of attorney. I control the assets. Otis smiled, and it was the terrifying smile of a predator who had already tripped the trap. You had power of attorney, Otis corrected, past tense. He pulled a second document from the envelope. This one was stamped with a time and date, 8:00 a.m., today. I may be old, Desmond, but I am legally competent. My doctors certified it this morning. And the first thing I did with my certified brain was dissolve your power of attorney. The room gasped. The murmurs grew louder. This was a public execution. But I did not stop there. Otis continued, his voice gaining strength. I realized that as long as I owned this house, you would try to claw it away from me when I died. You would fight Nia for it. You would drag this family through probate court for years. So I removed the temptation. He looked at me, then his eyes filled with a fierce, protective pride. He slid the document down the table toward me. This morning at 9 o'clock, I transferred the deed of this property and all my remaining assets into an irrevocable trust. It is called the Otis Brooks Legacy Trust. And do you know who the sole trustee is? Desmond looked at this document in front of me. He saw the signature. He saw the notary stamp. He saw the name listed under trustee. Nia, Otis said, his voice ringing like a bell. The realization hit Desmond like a physical blow. He staggered back, hitting the wall. He looked at me, horror dawning in his eyes. He had been fighting me to stay in the house, thinking he had a legal claim, thinking he could manipulate his father. But the ground had shifted beneath his feet. I did not just evict you as a daughter, I said, speaking for the first time since Otis stood up. I am now evicting you as the legal representative of the owner. This is not your house, Dad. It is not even Grandpa's house anymore. It is an asset of the trust. And as trustee, my fiduciary duty is to remove non-paying tenants who damage the property. I picked up the document and held it to my chest. You have 48 hours, I said, my voice cold and final. Not 30 days. 48 hours. Because now you are not just a bad tenant, you are a trespasser. The room was silent. The balance of power had not just shifted, it had been obliterated. Desmond Brooks was not a victim. He was a fraud. And the daughter he tried to break was now the landlord of his entire existence. The silence in the room was no longer the silence of judgment. It was the silence of a tomb. I held the single sheet of paper in my hand. It was light, fluttering slightly in the draft from the air conditioning, yet it carried the weight of a guillotine blade. I stepped closer to my father, Desmond, who was still leaning against the wall, looking as though his bones had turned to liquid. I did not shove the paper at him. I did not throw it. I extended it with the polite professional detachment of a process server. This is your formal notice to quit. I stated, my voice cutting through the tension. Desmond looked at the paper as if it were radioactive. He did not reach for it, so I placed it gently on the table next to the shattered remains of his pride. You mentioned the law earlier, Kyle, I said, turning my gaze to my brother-in-law, who had retreated into the shadows of the room. You talked about statutes and rights. Well, let us talk about the specific bylaws of the Otis Brooks Legacy Trust. I tapped the document with my index finger. Grandpa Otis was very specific when he drafted the occupancy requirements for this property. Section 4, Paragraph B. The Morality Clause. It states that any beneficiary or occupant of the trust's assets must demonstrate, and I quote, a standard of care and moral fortitude consistent with the values of the family. I looked back at my mother, Wanda, who was weeping into her hands. Abandoning a family member during a medical emergency is listed as a breach of that clause. Financial exploitation of a senior citizen is listed as a breach. Public defamation of a family member is listed as a breach. I took a step back, addressing the entire room, ensuring every aunt, uncle, and deacon heard the verdict. You are not being evicted because you are poor. You are being evicted because you are in breach of contract. You have violated the moral code of the very man whose roof you sleep under. The trust does not support parasites. It supports family. And by your own actions, you have resigned from that position. Desmond finally picked up the paper, his hands shaking so violently the paper rattled. 30 days, he whispered, reading the bold text at the bottom. You are giving us 30 days. That is the legal requirement, I replied coldly. If it were up to me, you would be on the curb tonight. But unlike you, I follow the rules. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. The villa must be broom-swept and returned in its original condition. Any damages to the property will be deducted from the small stipend Grandpa has graciously decided to leave you to prevent you from starving. I paused, letting the reality sink in. But make no mistake, this is not a negotiation. This is not a warning. This is the end. On the 31st day, the locks will be changed. If your belongings are still here, they will be donated to charity. If you are still here, you will be removed by the sheriff. I looked at Kyle one last time. And Kyle, before you call your lawyer, remember that suing a trust for enforcing its own written bylaws is a great way to get countersued for court costs. I suggest you save that money for a security deposit on an apartment. I turned around, the white fabric of my suit catching the light. The room parted for me again, but this time there were no whispers. There was only fear. I had walked in as the villain, but I was walking out as the landlord. The war was over. I had not just won. I had redefined the battlefield. I walked out the front door, leaving them standing in a house that was no longer theirs, holding a piece of paper that marked the expiration date on their entitlement. The heavy oak door had barely clicked shut behind me when the first scream tore through the villa. I paused on the front porch, adjusting my cuffs, listening to the sound of an empire collapsing. Inside the living room, the polite facade of the birthday party had disintegrated into absolute anarchy. Kyle was the first to move. He stared at the eviction notice lying on the table as if it were a contagious disease. His brain, usually slow and clouded by arrogance, was firing rapidly. He was running the numbers. No house, no allowance, no trust fund. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. The Brooks family was not a gold mine. They were a sinkhole. Jasmine, blind to the predator standing next to her, reached out for comfort. She grabbed Kyle's arm, her mascara running down her cheeks. "Kyle, baby!" She sobbed, her voice high and shrill. "What are we going to do? We have to fix this. You have to call your lawyer friend again." Kyle reacted by violently jerking his arm away, sending Jasmine stumbling back into the edge of the dining table. The sound of her hip hitting the wood echoed in the stunned silence. "Do not touch me!" Kyle roared, his face twisted into a mask of pure disgust. "There is no lawyer, you idiot! There is no case! Did you not hear your grandfather? He owns everything. You own nothing." Jasmine looked at him, confused, her hand trembling as she reached for him again. "But we are family. We will figure it out together. Nia will calm down and shut up about Nia," Kyle shouted, causing the church elders to flinch. "Nia is done with you, and honestly, so am I." The room gasped. My mother Wanda looked up from her, weeping, her eyes wide. Kyle turned on them, his true nature finally shedding its skin. He looked at Desmond, then at Wanda, and finally back at Jasmine with a sneer that could peel paint. "You lied to me," he spat, pointing a finger in Jasmine's face. "When we met, you told me your family was royalty. You told me you had old money. You acted like you were some heiress waiting for a payout. But look at you. You are just a broke girl in a rented dress living in a house your grandfather let you borrow out of pity." "Kyle, stop," Jasmine pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "You love me. We are married. I married a lifestyle." "Jasmine," Kyle cut her off, his voice dropping to a cruel, cold register. "I married the trips. I married the connections. I married the safety net. I did not sign up to live in a one-bedroom apartment with a woman who has never washed a dish in her life. I am not going to be homeless with you, and I am certainly not going to support your deadbeat parents." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the keys to the Range Rover, the car that I paid for, the car that was currently in my name. He threw them onto the table. They skidded across the mahogany and hit the eviction notice. "I am done," he announced, adjusting his jacket. "I am filing for divorce tomorrow morning. Do not try to call me. Do not try to find me. And good luck paying for that Uber to get out of here." Jasmine collapsed onto the floor, a wailing heap of tulle and despair. Kyle stepped over her as if she were a piece of trash on the sidewalk. He did not look back. He walked straight past the stunned relatives, past the weeping mother, and out the front door. As he brushed past me on the porch, he didn't even make eye contact. He just kept walking, a rat fleeing the ship the moment the water touched his ankles. Inside, the wailing intensified. The family had lost their home, their money, and their pride in the span of an hour. But Jasmine had lost the illusion that had defined her entire adult life. She was finally seeing the world as it was, and it was ugly. The gravel of the driveway crunched loudly as I turned toward my car, a sound that usually signified departure, but today signaled an escape. I had my hand on the door handle, the cool metal grounding me, when I heard the frantic, stumbling footsteps behind me. I did not turn around. I knew that cadence. It was the sound of desperation trying to outrun consequence. Nia, wait. Please, Nia, you cannot just walk away. I felt a hand grab the hem of my white blazer. It was a weak, trembling grip, but it was enough to make me pause. I turned slowly, looking down. The camera of my mind pulled up and away, creating a high-angle shot that captured the pathetic reality of the moment. My mother, Wanda, the woman who had spent her life looking down on everyone else, was on her knees in the dirt. Her gray dress was stained with dust. Her face, usually composed and painted with haughty indifference, was a ruin. Mascara carved black rivers down her cheeks. Her lipstick was smeared. She looked up at me not with the authority of a parent, but with the terrified pleading of a child who has broken something she cannot fix. The guests, the aunts and uncles and deacons, stood on the porch in stunned silence, a Greek chorus watching the tragedy unfold. "Baby, please," she sobbed, clutching the fabric of my suit as if it were the hem of a savior's robe. "You are my daughter. You are my flesh and blood. I carried you for 9 months. I went through labor for you. Does that mean nothing? You cannot leave your mother on the street. We have nowhere to go. Desmond is broken. Jasmine is useless. You are the only one, Nia. You have always been the strong one." She gasped for air, her chest heaving. "I know we made mistakes. I know we were hard on you. But that is how we were raised. Tough love. We wanted you to be tough. And look at you. You are a CEO. You are successful. We did that, Nia. We made you who you are. Do not punish us for your success." I stared down at her, feeling a strange sensation in my chest. I waited for the guilt. I waited for that old familiar ache that used to compel me to fix everything, to smooth over the cracks, to buy the peace. But it did not come. The space where my guilt used to live was empty. It had been surgically removed along with the infected tissue during my operation. I reached down and peeled her fingers off my jacket one by one. Her grip was clammy. I took a step back, creating a physical boundary between her chaos and my calm. "You are right, Mom," I said, my voice terrifyingly even. "You did make me who I am. You taught me that love is transactional. You taught me that value is determined by utility. And you taught me that when something is broken beyond repair, you discard it." Wanda shook her head, fresh tears spilling over. "No, that is not true. We love you. We have always loved you." I laughed, a dry, sharp sound that made her flinch. "Love you do not know the meaning of the word. Love is sitting by a hospital bed. Love is answering the phone at 2 in the morning. Love is choosing your child over a concert ticket." Her eyes widened. She tried to stammer a defense, but I cut her off. "I remember the call, Mom. I remember calling you from the ambulance. I remember the pain tearing me apart. And I remember exactly what you said to the nurse when she called you for consent to operate because I was unconscious." I leaned down, bringing my face close to hers, forcing her to look into the eyes of the daughter she had killed. "The nurse told you I might die. She told you it was critical. And do you remember what you said? You were angry. You were annoyed that the call interrupted your favorite song. You covered the phone, but you did not cover it well enough." Wanda's face went pale. She remembered. I saw it in her eyes. The memory hit her like a physical slap. You said, "Do not disturb my joy." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and toxic. You told the woman holding your daughter's life in her hands that I was an inconvenience to your happiness. You chose the music. You chose the moment. You chose your joy over my breath. I stood up straight, towering over her, casting a long shadow that engulfed her kneeling form. Well, mother, I learned from the best. I have finally found my peace. I have found my sanity. I have built a life that does not include being your doormat. And now, seeing you here, seeing the consequences of your own greed finally catch up to you, I feel a sense of relief I cannot even describe. I opened the car door and slid into the leather seat. I rolled down the window just as she lunged forward again. "So I am going to ask you to do one last thing for me," I said, staring at her through the glass. Wanda looked up, hope flickering in her eyes for a brief delusional second. "Anything, Nia. Anything." I put on my sunglasses, blocking her out. "Get off my driveway, and do not disturb my joy." I started the engine. The roar of the motor drowned out her wailing. I did not look in the rearview mirror as I pulled away. I did not need to see them shrinking in the distance. They were already gone. I drove toward the city, toward the skyline, toward a future that was entirely beautifully mine. The 30th day arrived with a cruel punctuality. The sun hung high and bright over Oak Street, acting less like a source of warmth and more like an interrogation lamp exposing every flaw in the picture below. From the vantage point of the security cameras I had installed years ago, I watched the final act of the tragedy play out. There were no movers. There was no white glove service. There was just a rusted rental truck parked crookedly in the driveway, an ugly orange blemish against the manicured landscaping they could no longer claim. The camera shook slightly, mimicking the handheld instability of their lives as Desmond stepped out of the front door. He was not wearing his Sunday suit. He was wearing faded jeans and a t-shirt that hung loosely on his frame, evidence of the weight he had lost in a month of panic. He carried a cardboard box marked "Kitchen" in shaky marker. He did not walk with the chest-out strut of the deacon. He shuffled. His head was bowed low, his eyes fixed on the gravel, terrified to look up and meet the gaze of the world he was leaving behind. Wanda followed him, clutching a lamp in one hand and a trash bag full of clothes in the other. She wore large sunglasses, not for fashion, but for armor. She was trying to hide the puffiness of her eyes and the shame burning on her cheeks. She moved quickly, scuttling toward the truck like a cockroach caught in the sudden beam of a kitchen light. She shoved the bag into the back, the plastic tearing on a sharp metal edge, spilling a few of her designer scarves onto the dirty bed of the truck. She scrambled to pick them up, the indignity of it almost too sharp to watch. But the true punishment was not the labor. It was the audience. The neighbors, the people my parents had spent 5 years trying to impress, were watching. Mrs. Higgins from next door stood at the edge of her lawn, watering her hydrangeas with agonizing slowness. She didn't wave. She didn't offer to help. She just watched, her eyes tracking their movements with a mix of pity and morbid curiosity. Across the street, the Homeowners Association president was openly standing on his porch, arms crossed, ensuring that the trash was finally taking itself out. My parents could feel the eyes on them. It burned their skin. For decades, their entire identity had been wrapped up in the perception of success. They lived for the envy of others. Now they were the cautionary tale. They were the gossip. They were the frauds who had been evicted by their own daughter. The shame was a physical weight heavier than any furniture they were lifting. Desmond dropped the final box into the truck and slammed the rolling door shut. The metallic clang echoed down the street, a final gavel bang signaling the end of an era. He walked back to the front door one last time, not to look inside, but to leave the keys. He placed them under the mat, a gesture so suburban and small for a moment so catastrophic. He paused for a second, his hand resting on the wood, perhaps remembering the lie he had lived there. Then he turned away. He got into the driver's seat of the rental truck. Wanda climbed into the passenger side, refusing to look out the window. The engine sputtered to life, coughing a cloud of black smoke into the pristine air. As they pulled away, leaving the villa silent and empty, they weren't just leaving a house. They were leaving behind the illusion that they were good people, and they were driving into a future where the ATM was permanently out of order. The sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse felt different now. 6 months ago, it felt like a spotlight on my loneliness. Today, it felt like a warm embrace. I sat on the plush rug watching Leo and Maya attempt to build a skyscraper out of magnetic tiles. Sitting in the armchair beside us was Grandpa Otis, looking 10 years younger than he had in the nursing home. He was laughing, a deep rumbling sound that filled the room as Maya tried to explain why her building needed a swimming pool on the roof. He was no longer a prisoner of his own family. He was the patriarch of mine. My phone pinged on the coffee table. It was not a crisis. It was a notification from Marcus Sterling. The Series B funding had officially closed. $50 million. The morality clause investigation had concluded that my only moral failing was waiting too long to cut off the toxicity. The public, fickle as always, had moved on from Jasmine's tearful videos once the truth about the VIP tickets and the ledger came out. My company was not just surviving, it was thriving. I had doubled my staff, expanded to Europe, and for the first time in my life I was working because I loved the challenge, not because I was terrified of being poor. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out over the city. Somewhere down there in the grid of streets and struggle, a very different reality was playing out. I did not visit, but I knew. The private investigator sent me monthly updates, a grim newsletter I read, to remind myself why I never unlocked the door. Desmond and Wanda were living in a basement apartment in a neighborhood they used to make fun of as we drove past. The walls were thin and the heating was spotty. There were no country club lunches. There were no leased luxury cars. Desmond was working part-time as a greeter at a discount superstore, forced to smile at people who ignored him. A cruel irony for a man who demanded respect he never earned. Wanda spent her days staring at a television she could barely afford, bitter and aging rapidly without the expensive creams and treatments she used to charge to my card. They were together just as they always claimed, they wanted to be trapped in a misery of their own making. And then there was Jasmine. The updates on her were the most jarring. The influencer dream had died the moment the credit card bill hit. She was working the lunch shift at a diner on 45th Street. I could picture her clearly. The grease stains on her apron, the sensible shoes she hated, the ache in her feet after an 8-hour shift of carrying plates for tips that barely covered her rent. She was finally learning the value of $1, a lesson I had tried to teach her with words, but that life was now teaching her with blisters. I turned back to the room. Otis caught my eye and winked. The twins knocked over their tower and shrieked with joy. This was my life now. It was small. It was quiet. It was authentic. I had lost a family of parasites, but I had gained a home. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the clean, cool air of freedom. The ledger was closed, the debt was paid. And for the first time in 26 years, the balance was finally in my favor. The sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the Chicago skyline in hues of bruised purple and burning gold. I pressed my hand against the cool glass of the balcony door, feeling the vibration of the city humming beneath my feet. From this height, the cars were just streams of light, and the people were invisible specks of dust. It was a perspective that I had finally applied to my own life. The noise, the chaos, the demands that once drowned me were now so small they could not touch me. For 30 years, I believed that family was a life sentence. I thought that sharing a last name meant sharing a burden. I thought that DNA was a binding contract that required me to set myself on fire just to keep them warm. I had equated martyrdom with daughterhood. I believed that saying no was a sin, and that boundaries were a betrayal. It took a scar across my abdomen and a near-death experience to learn the most important lesson of my existence. Blood is an accident of biology. It is a random roll of the genetic dice that connects you to people you did not choose. But family. Real family. That is not accidental. That is a deliberate daily choice. Family is not the people who cut you open to see what they can take. Family is the people who stitch you back together when you are falling apart. I turned slightly, catching my reflection in the window. I did not see the tired, desperate girl who used to write checks to buy affection. I saw a woman who had survived her own upbringing. I saw a mother who had broken the cycle so her children would never have to. Leo and Maya would never know the feeling of being an ATM. They would never know the anxiety of a conditional love that vanished the moment the money ran out. They would grow up knowing that their worth was inherent, not transactional. Grandpa Otis laughed in the background, a sound that anchored me to the present. He was my blood, yes. But more importantly, he was my friend. He was my ally. We had chosen each other in the trenches. The camera of my life began to pull back, widening the frame. I became smaller, merging with the architecture of the city I had conquered. The lights of the skyscrapers flickered on one by one, a constellation of human endeavor against the darkening sky. I was no longer defined by the people who had abandoned me. I was defined by the peace I had fought to secure. Some might call me cold for walking away. Some might call me heartless for closing the vault. Let them talk. I knew the truth. I had not abandoned my family. I had simply evicted the strangers who were squatting in my heart. The eviction was finalized. The locks were changed. And as I looked out at the infinite horizon, I realized that for the first time in my life, the house was clean. Blood makes you related. Loyalty makes you family. And I had finally chosen mine. Nia's story serves as a brutal but necessary reminder that shared DNA is not a license for exploitation. We are often conditioned to believe that we must endure abuse simply because it comes from family, but true loyalty is a two-way street. Relationships should be built on mutual respect, not financial dependency or emotional manipulation. Nia teaches us that setting boundaries is not an act of betrayal, but an act of self-preservation. You cannot heal in the same environment that broke you. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is change the locks on your heart and walk away. If you agree that peace is more important than toxic tradition, share this story with someone who needs to hear it today.